Hello everybody and welcome back to Journey to Jool episode 4. And we're finally in the Jool system and we're trying to get an aerobraking node. We finally found one, at least. Well, why am I talking about we? I'm doing all of this alone, but maybe I feel with the crew of the 5 brave Kerbals who are trying to manage to get to all of the 5 moons of the Jool system. So here we go, we're burning radially to get into the atmosphere of Jool, diving into the big green giant to slow our ship down without using any more of our delicious fuel. And here we almost had a lathe encounter, but fortunately we managed to get past that and inside of the atmosphere. 135-ish kilometers above the surface should be enough to get a stable orbit without destroying the spacecraft. But honestly, it depends on how large your craft is, what's your orbital velocity, angle of attack. It does not really matter in stock aerodynamics, but if you use far or near, then of course it does. And we're taking a sneak peek inside of the cargo bay where our lander craft is waiting for its deployment. And while it's waiting, it can do some science, because we're already in the high space above Jool. And we can do a gravity scan, we can do a crew report, and we could do a lot of other things if I would manage to click on the science parts. But unfortunately, Kerbal Space Program decides to move the camera about so that I have to trail with the mouse always behind of the parts. But finally we managed to get all of the necessary science, and yes, of course, we also need an EVA report. Dumor Kerman is the brave Kerbal who will do more than all of his friends who will wait inside of the spacecraft while he does the dangerous job of gathering the science. And speaking of gathering the science, of course he has to pick up all the data that has been collected in the science parts of the lander craft, and that's where he's going right now, straight to the cargo bay, which he will open manually from the outside as soon as he is in range. I'm using the standard Mark III cargo bays. Actually, it's 2 of the cargo bays, the largest one and the middle one. The largest one houses the lander, which can land on Tylo, lathe on all the other moons, a small space tug, and a docking port, of course. And the medium cargo bay houses the lab. And due to my idea of using the materials bay as an integral part of the structure of the lander, of course it is not so easy to get to the science, but Dumor Kerman is an expert in EVAs and in controlling his backpack, so he did it no problem at all. A little bit harder to get to that mystery goo, so we skip it for this time, because we also have a second one which we can use when we get into the upper atmosphere. Yes, the beauty of using Jool as an aerobraking node is you can use that maneuver to gather some science from the upper atmosphere of Jool. Of course, if you get too much into the atmosphere, then you will break up and die. But we shall hope that this will not be the case for this brave crew of 5 Kerbals. Looking good so far, and we're time warping forward because we don't want to wait that amount of time until we get to the periapse in real time. Oops, and we have a lathe encounter, and we lost our periapse. Now we would crash into the giant planet of Jool, but fortunately brave Commander Jebediah Kerman initiates a rescue maneuver. At least he tries to, and he finally manages to get a new periapse, which is close to where the original one was, and we should be fine with our aerobraking maneuver. At least that's what his experience tells us, and experience is worth a lot in KSP. If you're a regular player, you will know that. Here's a beauty shot of the spacecraft, the Joolishka, named of course after the big green planet. And we're getting into position to do our rescue burn. Here we go, firing up the engines in 3, 2, 1, go! And here they are. The massive Kerbap KLR2 or KR2L. I always mix those up. That big Kerbap engines that look a lot like the F1 engine, the Apollo the Saturn V rocket, which of course was used in the Apollo program, looked like. And we got our periapse, and we're good to go to dive into the atmosphere, or at least skip through it, because the atmosphere of Jool is very dense. And are we ready to do some science near Jool? Yes, we are. I'm going to now open up the cargo bay not opening up the cargo bay, I mean gather more science from the lander. And this time it has a lot to tell us about the specifics of the planet we're orbiting. Gravity scan. You know the drill. If you played Kerbal Space Program, you know what to do to gather science. I don't have to tell you that. But if you're a new viewer or a new player, or you want to get engaged in Kerbal Space Program, science is one of the currencies that is used in Kerbal Space Program for you to be able to progress. Since version 090, funds and reputation have joined science as one of the currencies in-game, but in my opinion science is still the main goal of this game. And of course that stupid orientation problem with the Kerbals on EVA is now making it impossible for me to get to the materials bay. You see, for some odd reason the Kerbals kind of orient themselves in one specific direction once they get out, and you have no chance of getting them back to somewhere else. If you know why that is, or how I could circumvent that, and left clicking on them and dragging them to the new position does not work because they get back to their old position, then please comment below, let me know, or write me an email, or send me a Twitter message, or shout out into the ether so I can hear you across from wherever you are. But on the other hand, now we can get to our mystery goo. But we can't get back. We're now trapped and doomed to die in the atmosphere of Jool, unless the operator of that backpack gets his act together and gets Doomer Kermal out of this predicament. But he is too inexperienced, or at least does not have recent practice to do that. But finally we managed to get out and get about and back into the capsule after a long, sweet look at the horizon of Jool. and we're cleaning our experiments so we can get new science from the mystery goo and the materials bay. We're also getting the rocket into position to perform an emergency burn should the need arise, should our periaps is set too low and the craft is already plunging down into the depths of Jool. You realize how depths and deaths sounds awfully familiar for someone like me who has English as a second language. It's sometimes really hard to distinguish that if somebody speaks about it without any context. But of course, the beauty of language is if you talk about something, usually there is some context you're referring to. And here we go, we're now captured in the Jool system. I'm always talking about system, although it's not really a star system, but in reality it's like a miniature space, a miniature solar system, although it's not the sun but a planet, and it's moons and not planets, but you know what I mean. And we got some science from the upper atmosphere, and Doomer Kerman once more on the case to get them. If he manages to look where he's supposed to look. And now we got the correct orientation to get the experiments. Until we realize there's nothing to get. Oh yes, there is. We got our material study. Now we go collect the mystery goo. Mystery goo collected. We collect the mystery goo from the other side. Mystery goo collected. Kerbal head squished. No Kerbal head, very much alive. Those helmets can take quite a punch, can they not? And we're collecting some more science and get back into the crew compartment. At this period of time I was thinking about doing a second aerobrake, so my Jool apoaps would get significantly lower. Because in the first pass we got our capture, but we still have a very, very high apoaps. You can see it in the top left corner and one of the HUD modules of Kerbal Engineer. You can see our apoaps is very high, and we're even outside of the orbit of Paul. And as luck would have it, we get a Tylo encounter. Yes, sir. Why not use that? Because Tylo would be our next station on our big Jool 5 mission. But of course you have to kind of finagle around a bit, because we're still inside the atmosphere, at least a little bit, and now we can get some more science, which we forgot the first time around. Folding up the solar panels so we don't get so we don't lose them, and then we're trying to get our encounter, or at least keep our encounter with Tylo. So we're trying to keep the rocket at a certain speed, or keep the orbit at certain settings, and after that we're doing some more burnings, so we get a prograde encounter. You know, if you get a retrograde encounter, it's a little bit harder to get down and off the planets, but if you get a prograde encounter, everything is easier. Doing a small plane change, so we're close to an equatorial orbit once we encounter Jool. And if you're not a regular KSP player, I realize how boring that must have looked to you. Just some lines and dots and stars and some guy putting his mouse somewhere and dragging it around. But, spoiler alert, the fun is coming, because, as you may know, sometimes Kerbal Space Program screws with your planned encounters. Yes, the game has a mind of its own when it comes to spheres of influence. So here I have set up a really fine encounter with Tylo, which we can actually see in the background. And we're opening back up the cargo bay since we're out of the atmosphere. And now we're transferring our brave Doomer Kerman to the lander. Still got the good periapps around Tylo. But as you will see in a few minutes or seconds even, there is a problem. And also a problem with the crew transfer system, because Doomer Kerman did not want to leave willingly, at least not via the crew transfer system, which sometimes kind of lags or does not react at all or something. But we always have our EVA possibilities. Cleaning up the experiments so we don't forget them, which would be embarrassing if we would already be down at the surface of Tylo and realized, hey, I forgot to clean the materialist bay, now I can't get the science from that part, and here we go, we lost our encounter. That's the thing I mentioned earlier. Sometimes Kerbal Space Program just says, it would be too easy for you to just have an encounter and then land on a planet, wouldn't it? No, I take away your encounter and you have to do a correction burn. Or maybe there actually is a scientific explanation for that. If you know it, or if you have any idea why that happens and keeps happening, because you will see it a few more times now, please tell me. I'm dying to know, because this is really annoying. And if there's a way to plan ahead to avoid this that kind of situation, I would be really glad for future missions. And now we're burning again our precious fuel, which is scarce enough, as you may imagine. Still, the Joolishka, the top stage of the Joolishka has more than 7,000 meters per second of delta V, which should technically be enough to travel around the Jool moons and probably get a good encounter back to Kerbin. But as you know, in Kerbal Space Program, nothing really happens as planned, or at least only if your name is Scott Manley. Shout out to the great Scotsman, by the way. You're quite an inspiration for some of my projects, to be honest. And great job working at Apple. Honestly, I'd prefer Microsoft, but that's just me. And once again, we're fiddling with the encounter, burning and losing it, burning and losing it, and once more in. Finally, we get into the sphere of influence of Tylo. Yes, we have our Tylo encounter. Tylo, the thrasher of spaceships, the tyrant of gravity, the killer of everything that wants to land on it. Why? This thing has, well, almost the gravity of Earth, but what am I talking about? We're not in the solar system, not Earth, of course, Kerbin. But, of course, since Tylo does not have an atmosphere, your descent will not be slowed down by air friction, so you crash into the surface unhindered unless you burn a lot of fuel. And in order to do that, you have to have a lander with massive amounts of delta V. The figure I am always using when I construct Tylo vehicles is something around 5,500 meters per second of delta V. And here we see Doomer Kerman doing his science collection, doing more than any other Kerbal on this spacecraft so far. But that of course will change, because in order to achieve Jebediah's level of the Jool 5 challenge, every single Kerbal has to land on every single moon. So Jebediah will land on Pole, Bob will land on Bob, Dumore, since he's already doing all that stuff, will land on Tylo, and let's see about Val and Lathe. I'll make that up on the go. Speaking of the Jool 5 challenge, if you've been a reader of the forums, unfortunately Ziv, the creator of the Jool 5 challenge, has more or less abandoned it, which is sad because I plan to submit this entire video series as my mission report. But regardless, I will continue on and provide you with regular episodes of my journey to Jool. Shout out to Ziv for putting up that challenge and really keeping it alive for so long. It's really one of the most desirable achievements you can get in Kerbal Space Program if you're a regular forum user. And we are in a stable orbit around Tylo, and we now have our science near Tylo. Of course, you have your science far away in space, high above a planet or a moon. You have your science near the respective planet, and then you have the science. If you have a planet with atmosphere, you have the higher atmosphere, you have the lower atmosphere. Then you have the science you can gather when you land your vehicles, of course depending on the biomes, which have been added recently in version 0.90. And this of course opens up new possibilities and ridiculous amounts of science that you can gather. Speaking of science, we dump all our science in that crew capsule, but we want to get our science back with the lab once we get back to Kerbin. But that can wait, because we still have a lot of time ahead of us. And we're making a smaller orbit so that our lander vehicle has it easier to get down and get back up from the surface. Of course, burning a lot of fuel to get that happening. Doing another plane change, so we have more or less an equatorial orbit. And of course, a lot of warping and burning. Warp and burn, warp and burn, warp and burn around Tylo, which looks, well, remarkably like the moon, honestly, but it's a lot bigger and a lot meaner. Tylo, the Tyrant, will destroy anything that wants to land on it without the necessary precautions. And in the background we have our next stops, Lathe and Val. And here I made the mistake of separating the drive section, at the empty drive section, and immediately pressing time acceleration afterwards, which resulted in that weird little clipping error. The spacecraft would have been able to get out of the drive section without any problem. I've tried it in sandbox mode, but unfortunately I could not show you that because, as I mentioned before, I messed up. And we're now finalized our orbit around Tylo. We're ready to get the lander down, and if I can make it, you'll see in the next episode. Stay tuned and goodbye.